0004 a.m. The first sound in the darkness was a short, frantic beep. Then, the piercing wail of a fire alarm ripped through the silence of the night, shattering the stillness over apartment building number 28 on Ellenborough Street. In less than 2 minutes, doors were flying open, hallway lights blazed to life, and the thunder of footsteps echoed through every floor. An elderly woman on the 3rd floor threw on a robe, muttering curses under her breath for being woken up. A child burst into tears in their mother's arms. There wasn't much smoke yet, but the smell was unmistakable, a blend of burning wood and electrical short circuits seeping through every crack and crevice, pushing the air in the building into a state of nervous tension. On the 2nd floor, outside apartment 204, the door remained closed. No one came out. The fire department arrived quickly. In the flashing red lights, Lieutenant Miller lowered his mask and scanned the crowd gathering below. He didn't see anything alarming. The smoke wasn't thick, no signs of a major fire. Probably just a smoldering electrical outlet. Happened all the time in these old buildings. He and 2 of his crew entered the 2nd floor hallway, where the acrid smell was even stronger. The door to apartment 204 was locked. After a few loud calls that went unanswered, they forced it open. The apartment was eerily silent. No fire, no people, no TV, no fan. Just that suffocating smell rising from the far end of the hallway, where a small, windowless room usually served as a storage closet. Miller moved forward, flashlight in hand, shining it on the plywood paneling that covered one wall. He tapped it lightly. The sound was hollow, like knocking on an empty box. A strange feeling washed over him. Something wasn't right. It wasn't the sound of a brick wall. He stopped, pressed his ear against it. A breath. Miller raised his hand, signaling his crew. The whole team took a step back. No one spoke. No one needed to. Their eyes said it all. One of them knelt down, using pliers to pry at the plywood. Each nail popped loose, each piece of wood cracked. Then a gap appeared. A rush of damp, stale air escaped. The smell of time locked away. And then, from the darkness, a small hand reached out. Thin, dirty, trembling. They stood frozen for 2 seconds. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. The youngest firefighter whispered, "Jesus Christ." Then they acted as if pulled by strings of instinct. One of them knelt down, gently removing the rest of the paneling. From inside the narrow space, less than 2 feet deep, a small body emerged. A girl, maybe 6 years old, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Her body looked like a skeleton, covered in a thin layer of skin. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, as if the light in front of her was too bright, as if she'd never seen the world clearly before. No one knew what to do in that moment. A paramedic stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "What's your name? Can you hear me?" The girl blinked for the first time, then her lips moved. "Lucia Carter. Please, please save me. I've been in here for 6 years. Please don't put me back in there." Out in the hallway, a radio crackled to life. An older police officer asked over the radio, "Found anyone in the apartment?" Miller answered softly, as if afraid to startle the girl. A little girl. Alive, but very weak. No one else. The officer asked, "Name?" Miller looked at Lucia, who was being lifted onto a stretcher. "Lucia Carter. We need to find a legal guardian, ASAP." Lucia was taken away in silence. Everyone avoided looking her in the eye, not out of disgust, but because no one was brave enough. There was something in her eyes, not life, not exactly death. Just an emptiness, so deep and still, as if she had truly been inside there for 6 years and gotten used to not hearing her name called. 00:39 a.m. The phone at police headquarters rang. The dispatcher found a name in the records. Michael Carter, biological father, granted temporary guardianship 6 years ago before his wife died from complications after childbirth. The call was patched through to Utah. A man sat in a barracks, holding a photo of his wife, staring at the endless night outside the window. He didn't know that the daughter he thought was living safely in the care of relatives had just been found behind a wall, where she hadn't heard her name called for 2,000 days. The phone on the desk vibrated softly. Michael Carter glanced at the screen. Unknown number, area code from Boston. He hesitated for less than 2 seconds, then picked up the phone. Carter speaking. On the other end, a voice, firm but with a hint of hesitation. We're with the Boston Police Department, Detective Unit. Are you Michael Carter, biological father of Lucia Carter? His heart seemed to stop for a moment. Yes. Is something wrong? The voice on the other end slowed, as if trying to find the gentlest way to say it, but not gentle enough to keep Michael from falling apart. Lucia has been found during a small fire. She's alive, but she's been held captive for the past several years. We need you to come here immediately to give a statement. No one in the barracks saw Michael cry then. He didn't cry. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, without a word. Only his hand tightened around the old photo, the photo of Isabel holding their newborn child, Lucia. The flight to Boston was the earliest he could book. He sat alone in the window seat, his eyes glued to the night sky. The stars seemed alien. The clouds drifting by no longer brought a sense of peace. He thought about every phone call where he had believed the voice of Melissa, his second wife. The words that Lucia was fine, she's being a good girl. You just worry about your work. I'll take care of her. He had wanted to come home, had made plans. But back then, Michael thought he was living for his daughter's future, doing the right thing as a father. Now he saw he had been absent, not for a few days, but for 6 years. At Boston Medical Center, the morning light hadn't yet reached the empty hallway. In room 5C, Lucia lay still. She wasn't asleep, just keeping her eyes half closed, as if she were listening. Every sound in the hallway made her flinch. A reflex formed after years of living in a place with no human voices, only silent footsteps, slamming doors, and sometimes the click of a lock. Michael arrived before dawn. Police and medical staff were waiting to guide him, but he didn't let anyone stop him. He walked straight to his daughter's room, stopping in front of the glass door. Lucia had her back to him. She was so small that he couldn't believe it was his daughter. A tiny being, lost in the middle of a white bed. No bandages, no support equipment. Just a very light, very steady breath. Michael didn't go in right away. He just stood there, watching, his hand on the glass, as if to touch the distance that had stretched for too long. A nurse said softly, "Lucia is very sensitive to noise. Go ahead and go in, but don't rush into talking to her." Michael nodded. The door opened softly. He walked in, each step slow as if he were afraid of breaking the quiet space. There was no "daddy's here," as he had imagined in his head. No reunion like in the movies. He just sat down. Lucia didn't turn around, but Michael knew. She knew he was there. Her small shoulders trembled slightly. Her slender fingers curled up close to her body. He took out an old, worn object from his pocket. That old photo of Isabel and Lucia. He placed it on the table next to the bed. He leaned down, his voice cracking in his throat. "Daddy's here, Lucia. I'm so sorry. I'm too late." There was no reply, no tears, but her shoulders twitched. Not jerking, not a fearful reaction, just like a light breeze passing over her spine. Michael couldn't hold back. He lowered his head further, his hand clenching into a fist. "I thought you were okay. I thought they would love you like family. I had no idea they would treat you like this." No one answered, just the hum of the air conditioner in the white space. A moment later, very softly, Lucia pursed her lips, trying to force out each sound as if they had been locked away for too long. "Daddy." Just one word, as small as the sound of the wind passing by. But for Michael, it was enough to rip apart his chest. He turned away, covering his face with his hands, and for the first time, he burst into tears. Not out of shame, but because he was no longer worthy of being called that by his daughter. The next day, as the sun barely peeked through the frosted windows of the hospital, 2 plainclothes police officers appeared in the special treatment area. One of the 2 was Detective Roy Jennings, who had been following the case since the fire department called it in. The other was a young officer named Lena, with a gentle face and deep eyes, chosen simply because they thought Lucia would be afraid of men. Michael leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving the door to his daughter's room. He had been there all night, not sleeping, not leaving, not talking much either. When Jennings approached and said he wanted to take Lucia's statement, Michael said only one thing: "Can I stay with her?" Jennings nodded. He didn't object because he had daughters. He understood more than anyone. Inside, Lucia was sitting, leaning against the pillows, holding the stuffed animal that the nurse had given her that morning. Her eyes were as still as an unruffled lake. Not afraid, but not trusting either. She observed every movement, every glance, every time the adults inhaled and exhaled. A survival instinct honed by darkness and silence. Lena sat down first. She didn't have a notebook, no tape recorder. Just a young woman in a soft jacket, her hair tied back, sitting on a plastic chair like a big sister. She asked in an almost whispered voice. Lucia didn't answer. "That's okay," Lena smiled. She knew the child needed time. And then Michael spoke. He sat down next to the bed, his eyes on his daughter, his hands on his own knees, not touching her. "You can tell them anything you want. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Daddy's here. I'll protect you. I'm not going anywhere. Don't be afraid." Lucia turned her head. Her eyes met her father's. A slight nod. No one forced her. She began to speak. At first it was short, disjointed sentences. No time, no order. Just fragments. "I've been in there for 6 years. I was so scared. After you left. What Melissa changed. Once she turned off the lights and locked me in there just because I dropped a glass of milk. The room smelled like under an old bed. At first there was a blanket, later just an old carpet. Once I tried to push the board. It didn't move, and no one answered. After that, I didn't try again." Lucia spoke as if she were telling about a room in a fairy tale. But what came out of her mouth were icy pieces of reality. Michael clenched his hands, his knuckles white. But he didn't interrupt. He just lowered his head, as if wanting to hear every word, every offbeat sound. I didn't cry, because every time I cried she would say, "If you make any more noise, I'll lock you in there for a week." And she did. Lucia learned to be silent. She listened to footsteps to know if she would get to eat that day, heard the sound of the door latch to know if Melissa was home or away. Sometimes Tyler, Melissa's stepson, looked at me through the crack in the door. He didn't say anything, just looked, then left. I don't know if he understood what was happening. I used to dream of a window. I drew it with my fingernails on the wooden wall, a little each day, to imagine that I was looking outside. Jennings sat motionless. The pen in his hand never wrote. His eyes were heavy, as if every word of the 6-year-old had been carved straight into his skin. Lucia didn't use harsh words, didn't say pain, didn't use the word hate. But what Lucia said made the whole room feel cold. Once I got sick. My body was hot. I heard talking outside the room. Melissa told someone that I was at my grandmother's house, but I was still in there. Every time I coughed, I tried to block my mouth with my sleeve so I wouldn't make a sound. When Lucia got to that point, Michael lowered his head, covering his face with both hands. His shoulders trembled slightly. He didn't cry out loud, but everyone knew it was an unspoken breakdown. Lena touched Lucia's shoulder gently. So, when you saw people breaking down the wall to save you, what did you think? Lucia was silent for a long time. I thought I was dead. But then when they pulled me out, I smelled something. Very strange. The smell of wind, the smell of light. It smelled like Mom. The last sentence made Michael look up. Lucia turned to him, looked at him. I remember Mom. Auntie said Mom died because of me, but I don't believe it. Because I hear Mom's voice in my dreams, like your voice last night. Michael couldn't say anything. In that moment, every rank, every command, every operation he had experienced in his life became meaningless. For Lucia, her father's voice was what pulled her out of the darkness after 2,000 days. The statement ended after nearly an hour. No tape recorders, no transcripts. Jennings didn't need evidence, not from Lucia. He stood up, his eyes slightly red. He looked at Michael for a moment, then squeezed his shoulder lightly. No one said anything more. Lucia turned her back, rested her head on the pillow, her eyes wide open, looking at the ceiling. She wasn't sleeping, not dreaming, and not as awake as she had been before. Just empty. Michael pulled the chair closer, daring to reach out and take her small hand for the first time. This time, Lucia didn't flinch. Her hand was cold, but no longer shaking. This room had a window. Light shone in, but it didn't scare her anymore. Because now, light wasn't just something that came from a light bulb. It came from a familiar voice that Lucia hadn't heard in a long time. Daddy's here now. That afternoon, the forensics team returned to apartment 204. They measured the alcove where Lucia had been locked up. 22 inches deep, lined with plywood. Inside were the original fingernail marks, scribbled lines, a spiky sun, a window in blurry lines, and a single letter written over and over again with a piece of pencil lead. D for Daddy, D for daylight. D for something Lucia never let go of, to be seen and to be called by name. The police came to arrest Melissa Carter on the afternoon of the 3rd day, just 2 days after Lucia was rescued. No sirens, no handcuffs in the street. They didn't want to show off, and they didn't need to. They knew exactly what they were doing. Melissa was arrested while preparing dinner for Tyler. The kitchen was clean, the lights were bright, and the chicken stew was still smoking. She opened the door with a slightly surprised smile, as if greeting an old friend. But when the detective handed her the arrest warrant, her eyes changed. No panic, no resistance. Just a long blink, then she turned to call her son. Tyler, get your coat and wait in your room. The police didn't need to remind her. Melissa turned back, untied the apron, folded it neatly, and held out her hands, as if she knew the ending was already written. She was taken away in silence. The 8-year-old sat in the dining room, holding the TV remote, not pressing any channels. At the police station, the interrogation took place in a cold room, white walls, metal table. Melissa sat straight, her eyes straight ahead, her mouth almost not pursed. She didn't ask about Lucia's condition. She didn't ask for a lawyer either. When Jennings put the photo of the alcove on the table, the photo of the fingernail marks, The pencil marks and the deeply etched letter D, she only glanced at it. Jennings asked why. Melissa shrugged. She's not my child. I raised her. That was good enough. You don't know. The kid wasn't like other kids. She didn't cry, didn't laugh. She drove me crazy. She was like a blur in this house. Jennings didn't react. He didn't need to. Did you know that locking a child under the age of 6 in a space less than 2 feet deep for many years is a serious crime? Melissa smiled slightly. I didn't kill her. He asked, so who gave you the right to change the papers, cut off contact with her father, and transfer the benefits to your name? Melissa didn't smile anymore. I had people helping me. Jennings nodded. He had guessed. The next day, the police summoned the names that had appeared around the name Lucia Carter, but never asked, where is she? April was the first to be invited. She sat in the interrogation room, her face pale. She testified that one night she came home late from work and saw a child standing on the second-floor balcony. She saw it, but wasn't sure it was Lucia. The light was dim. She thought it must be someone's child who woke up. She repeated, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I didn't intentionally ignore it. I just thought, maybe she was sent to boarding school, as Melissa said. She was silent for a moment, then murmured, I heard Melissa say many times that Lucia had problems, didn't like anyone, didn't talk, always hid. I believed it. Jennings didn't answer. He just put a recording in front of April. It was Lucia's story. I was only allowed on the balcony when everyone was asleep. April burst into tears. Brian and Debbie came later. Brian is Michael's cousin. Debbie is his wife. They had received benefits on behalf of Michael for a short time when Lucia was 2 years old, when Michael went to war. When asked why they didn't contact Michael about Lucia's guardianship after Isabel died, Brian shrugged. I thought Melissa handled it. She said everything was fine. I didn't think there was a problem. Debbie interjected, we don't interfere in other people's business. Melissa always said Lucia was at her relative's house. She never showed up, and Melissa was her stepmother. She had the right. Jennings asked, did she have the right to keep a child in a closet for 6 years? Debbie lowered her head. No answer. Jennings didn't scold them. He didn't need to. He knew that the most terrible crime wasn't always clawed. It could be a silent turning away. At the hospital, Michael received a copy of Melissa's statement. He read every line, every sentence. Each word was like a punch in the chest. She's not my child. I didn't kill her. She's like a blur in the house. He put the paper down on the table, stood up, and walked into the hallway. No one stopped him. Everyone knew he needed to breathe. Michael didn't smoke, but at that moment, he wished he had one. He looked up at the sky. The grey of Boston covered everything. In his head, the years away from home, the delayed messages, the calls that lasted only a few minutes, all piled up like a silent sin. Lucia never blamed him, but she had learned not to wait. In the hospital room, Lucia lay on her side, looking out the window. The afternoon sun was as light as a breath. The nurse came in to check. Lucia turned to her, asked in a very small voice, "Where's Auntie Melissa?" The nurse didn't know what to say. She just stroked Lucia's hair gently and said, "You won't have to be alone anymore." Lucia nodded. No expression. She had heard that sentence before, from Melissa. When she was taken to the small room for the first time, "You'll only be here for a while, then you'll get out. If you're good." That time lasted 6 years. At the end of the day, Jennings walked out of the police station, his shoulders heavy. He wasn't tired because of the files. He was tired because of the eyes, Lucia's eyes, when recounting things that shouldn't be in a child's memory. He saw too many adults who had turned away. Sometimes evil doesn't shout. It just stands still, nods, and leaves. A more thorough investigation of the events since the girl was imprisoned was launched the very next morning. No longer just a family case, the incident had now become a state-level concern. A child disappeared from the system for 6 years, surviving in a wall cavity in the middle of the city, and no one knew. That raised questions bigger than neglect. The police remobilized all traffic cameras around the apartment building, extracting data from 5 years ago. They looked for all images related to Melissa Carter, focused on the times she entered and left building material stores, electrical repair shops, and nearby supermarkets. Using facial recognition software, police discovered a video from 3 years ago at a lumber store near the suburbs. The image was not sharp, but it was clear that Melissa was pushing a cart with her son Tyler walking beside her. In the cart was a sheet of wood measuring 2 by 2 meters, matching perfectly with the type used to cover the alcove behind the closet. The date on the video was May 14th. That date later matched the electrical repair bill that police seized, where an electrician had been invited to replace the main outlet, in the exact location behind the wall where Lucia was locked up. Melissa, taking her stepson to buy materials, showed intent and calculation. There was no sign of randomness or haste. Everything was planned, quietly and silently, just as she made a child disappear from the world without leaving a trace. Meanwhile, the forensics team working at apartment 204 continued to dig deep into every detail. They removed the plywood behind the cabinet using a method that preserved the original sample for analysis. On the inside of the board were many layers of dust, proving the installation had been long. When the light shone at an angle, officers found a dark brown streak hidden on the bottom edge. Rapid on-site testing confirmed it was dried blood. There was also a long strand of dark brown hair wrapped around a rusty nail, carefully preserved in a numbered nylon bag. The laboratory confirmed the blood and hair samples both belonged to Lucia. She had tried to escape, at least once. Some kind of impact, maybe when she used her shoulder to push against the wall, left blood. But no one heard. No one came. No one asked. In the supplementary report, Mr. Daniel Ross, the elderly neighbor living downstairs, was invited to the police station to provide further testimony. He walked slowly, with a cane, his voice hoarse but clear. I reported it before, almost 2 years ago. One night, I heard something like a child sobbing in the wall. Not quite crying, but like holding it back. I called the management office. They said it must be the TV. They even said I was delusional from insomnia. Jennings sat taking notes, without asking more. Daniel put his hand on the cane, his voice steady. I live alone. No one believed me. I told myself, maybe they were right. But really, I didn't even dare to believe that something like that could really happen. His testimony couldn't be used to prosecute anyone, but it painted another layer of the tragedy. No one wanted to believe that something too terrible could happen until it could no longer be denied. At the hospital, Michael received a copy of Melissa's statement. He read every line, every sentence. Each word was like a punch in the chest. She's not my child. I didn't kill her. She's like a blur in the house. He put the paper down on the table, stood up, and walked into the hallway. No one stopped him. Everyone knew he needed to breathe. Michael didn't smoke, but at that moment, he wished he had one. He looked up at the sky. The grey of Boston covered everything. In his head, the years away from home, the delayed messages, the calls that lasted only a few minutes, all piled up like a silent sin. Lucia never blamed him, but she had learned not to wait. In the hospital room, Lucia lay on her side, looking out the window. The afternoon sun was as light as a breath. The nurse came in to check. Lucia turned to her, asked in a very small voice, "Where's Auntie Melissa?" The nurse didn't know what to say. She just stroked Lucia's hair gently and said, "You won't have to be alone anymore." Lucia nodded. No expression. She had heard that sentence before. From Melissa. When she was taken to the small room for the first time, "You'll only be here for a while. Then you'll get out. If you're good." That time lasted 6 years. At the end of the day, Jennings walked out of the police station, his shoulders heavy. He wasn't tired because of the files. He was tired because of the eyes. Lucia's eyes, when recounting things that shouldn't be in a child's memory. He saw too many adults who had turned away. Sometimes evil doesn't shout. It just stands still, nods and leaves. The investigative pieces began to fall into place. Police tracked down a fake medical certificate that Melissa had used 3 years ago, sent to schools in the area. The content stated that Lucia was not healthy enough to attend class due to a weak immune system, requiring homeschooling. The doctor's signature on it, after comparison, did not belong to any doctor practicing in Massachusetts. One of the most dangerous things was not that Melissa locked up a child, but that she built an intricate system of lies, smooth and unchecked. Police found an open letter written by Melissa to the apartment manager in which she claimed that her husband's daughter was attending boarding school in Vermont, living with her sister. No one verified that, because Melissa knew if you speak confidently enough and keep everything outside tidy, no one will dare to knock on the door to ask. Jennings sat in the office, flipping through each page of the file, each detail a slap in the face to the procedure that was considered standard. A child living in a wall cavity. 6 years. Everyone around just had to do one simple thing. Ask one more question. Knock on the door again. But no one did. All Melissa needed to hide the truth was the silence of people who were familiar enough, but not close enough. Seeing enough, but not sure enough. Knowing enough, but not wanting to know more clearly. At the end of the day, Michael was shown a digital diagram of the wall cavity, where Lucia lived. Length 4.6 feet, depth 22 inches. No window, no fan. Walls made of plywood, lined with old paper. A vent was drilled by hand, less than an inch in diameter, connected to the back of the kitchen wall. On the wall was an etched drawing of a sun, crooked and skewed. Michael put his hand on the printed diagram. For the first time, he asked a question that no one in the room could answer. Why didn't she die? That question hung in the air, not out of suspicion, but out of the amazement, mixed with guilt of a father, when he knew his child had survived, despite no one saving her. Jennings closed the file. In the dark room, he noticed a small picture that Lucia drew in pencil during therapy, the image of a door. Behind it was the image of a child. The child had no mouth, but the eyes were wide open, looking straight out. In the right corner were 3 small letters. "I'm waiting." He wasn't sure who that message was for, but he knew that from now on, every door must be opened more carefully, longer, so that no one is left behind the wooden wall again. 2 weeks after being rescued, Lucia began to talk more, not as much as a normal 6-year-old, but enough to make the whole therapy group speechless. Each word she uttered carried a consideration, as if she weighed it with her heart before entrusting it through her lips. Dr. Claire Davison, a child psychologist, was the first to notice the difference in her. Lucia didn't talk to communicate. She talked to prove to herself that her voice was still there, like a fragile thread connecting Lucia to the world she had been robbed of. In the morning, Lucia sat on a wooden chair in the recovery room, holding a pencil, drawing slow, soft, and meticulous lines. The drawing that day was not the sun, not the door, but a spoon. Claire sat next to her and asked softly, "Why are you drawing a spoon?" Lucia replied, after a moment's hesitation. "Because it doesn't make a sound." Claire understood. For Lucia, things that didn't make a sound were safe. Michael still came to the hospital every day, not staying in the room for too long, not asking too many questions. He sat in the hallway, reading books, bringing cut fruit, and drawing with her if she wanted to. Some days, Lucia showed him a piece of paper she had drawn in therapy, the image of a fish in a glass jar. Michael asked what the fish's name was. Lucia didn't answer, just smiled very slightly. The first smile. That smile made Michael sit there for hours that day, not leaving even though the doctor's appointment was late. He sat to hold himself, because if she could smile, it meant that the light hadn't gone out completely in her. On the 17th day, Lucia agreed to walk barefoot on the carpet. This was a big step forward. Before that, she always asked to wear thick socks, even when sleeping. The feel of the bare floor made Lucia panic, because it evoked the memory of the cold wood under her body when she lay curled up in the narrow space. Also on that day, Claire asked a question she had prepared for many sessions. "Do you often think about the days in that room?" Lucia nodded. "I often dream. In the dream, I'm still there. But I know someone is coming. Who is it?" Lucia didn't look at Claire. Lucia looked out the window, where Michael was standing talking to a nurse. Lucia's voice was small, but steady. "It's Daddy." Claire recorded each word, in trembling writing. Not because she was touched, but because she knew that this was the time the child was pulling herself out of loneliness with what she had never dared to believe. Jennings visited the hospital one Friday afternoon. Not because of the case. He brought a small gift, a set of colored paper and a box of crayons that Lucia had used in the recovery camp. He didn't go into the room, just left it at the front desk. But when Michael told Lucia that the police officer left this, she pursed her lips, drew a picture of a person wearing a hat, and gave it to Michael. Michael gave it back to Jennings during an appointment at a small cafe. Jennings took the drawing, staring at the face drawn in blue crayon. The smallest words have the most weight. Jennings muttered that sentence as he folded the picture and put it in his pocket. He wasn't a sentimental person, but this case, or rather this girl, had left a mark that was very long and very deep. On the 20th day, Michael took Lucia out of the therapy room, walking around the quiet hallway. The hospital chose a time when there were no patients to reduce visual stimulation for her. The light was soft, no speakers, no sirens. Lucia walked close to him, slowly, in small steps, but clearly not leaning against the wall anymore. She pointed to a picture hanging near the corner of the hallway, the image of a house in a meadow. "I want that one." "What?" "The one in the middle." "The door." Michael leaned down, asking very softly, "What do you want at the door?" Lucia smiled very lightly, almost no sound. "I want to walk out, but this time, someone will be waiting on the other side." Michael stood still, taking a few seconds to keep himself from bursting into tears, because that sentence was not a dream. It was faith. At the end of the 3rd week, Dr. Claire organized a private therapy session with only Lucia and Michael, called the Memory Piece Program. They used images, questions, and related items to help the child redefine the past without being haunted. Lucia chose 3 things: the old blanket from the room Lucia used to live in, a photo of her mother Isabel that Michael brought, and the pencil lead Lucia used to scratch on the wood. When asked which of the 3 things made you the saddest, Lucia didn't point to the blanket, not at the pencil lead. She only pointed to the photo of her mother, but not because Mom died, Because I don't remember Mum's smell. Michael didn't collapse. He just took her hand, very gently, and promised, I'll help you fill in the missing memories, not with stories, but with presence. That night, Lucia slept without asking to lock the door. For the first time, Michael sat outside the hallway, not leaving like every other day, but this time, not because he was worried, but because he wanted to wait until morning to see his daughter wake up in a world where she no longer had to whisper to survive. Because now, every word Lucia said, no matter how small, was enough to change the lives of all those who had turned away. The trial of Melissa Carter opened on a Monday morning with no sun. Cold wind blew through the old brick buildings surrounding the Suffolk County Federal Courthouse, where dozens of reporters had been stationed since early morning. Cameras clicked continuously as the police car carrying Melissa arrived. She stepped out, head held high, hair neatly tied, not bowing her head, not dodging the lens. Michael looked through the one-way glass from a private room for witnesses. He wasn't surprised. That face, for years, always knew how to keep calm when needed. But now he no longer felt angry, just a vague emptiness, as if he were looking at a stranger who used to live in his house. The courtroom was packed. The seats were full. There were people who were unfamiliar with the Carter family, but had arrived early to quietly follow. There were also journalists, child rights organizations, and social workers, and also people who used to live in the same neighborhood, who had passed by Lucia in the darkness without knowing. Melissa stepped up to the stand. She didn't cry. No apologies. Answering each question in a steady, careful, cold voice. She testified that Lucia was her ex-husband's child. She had tried to take care of her, but the child had behavioral problems. She said she didn't like to communicate, didn't like to eat with others, didn't integrate. She admitted to temporarily isolating Lucia from the rest of the family to avoid conflict, but denied keeping her captive. I didn't do anything wrong. I protected my son. I kept the house safe. She couldn't explain why there was Lucia's blood on the wood, couldn't explain the fingernail marks, the letters she left, or the fake documents. But she still kept her voice as if she were the victim of a misunderstanding. The whole trial was shrouded in a kind of tense silence. Do you have anything you want to say to the child you locked up for 2,000 days? Melissa raised her head, didn't blink, answered in a voice as cold as the wind whistling through iron bars. She's alive. That's enough. The whole courtroom shook. No one expected her to be able to say that without even frowning. Michael turned away, his jaw clenched. Jennings stood behind him, bowing his head, his hand clenched into a fist. Lucia appeared in court at the end of the trial as a special witness. Lucia was escorted by Dr. Claire and a child advocate lawyer. A simple white dress, soft fabric shoes, her hair neatly braided. Her eyes were wide open, her hand squeezing a small rubber ball. Lucia stood before hundreds of people, but didn't shake. The judge asked, "Do you want to say anything?" Lucia took a slow breath. "Auntie told me if I was silent, I wouldn't be thrown away like Mom." Lucia looked up at Melissa, her voice still soft. "So I was silent. I didn't say anything for 6 years. I heard everything, but I didn't dare to scream." A second of silence. Then the whole courtroom went silent. No one moved. Lucia lowered her head. "Now I think I can talk now. Just one sentence." But like a needle piercing through the fake wall that Melissa had built for so many years, every eye in the courtroom became heavy. No more doubt, no more argument, just the naked truth standing before them. Melissa was sentenced to 25 years in prison for illegal imprisonment, child abuse, document forgery, and abuse of guardianship. No one stood up to ask for a reduced sentence, not a relative. No letters of sympathy were read. No, humane pleas. As police led Melissa out of the courtroom, dozens of people stood along both sides of the aisle. Some held signs reading, "No room for indifference." Some wore hats with the image of the sun and the letter D to support Lucia. A middle-aged woman carrying a crumpled paper bag threw it at Melissa's feet as she passed. Inside was a wooden doll, the kind of toy with no eyes, no mouth. A man threw a dried-up carton of milk, shouting, "You let a child live like a ghost." Melissa didn't react, but for the first time, her steps slowed, no longer cold. The media exploded. Major news outlets ran headlines, "Girl in the closet, trial shakes the nation. Lucia Carter, the child who made America look again." Local television replayed Lucia's testimony many times, interlaced with images of the closet, the scribbled drawings, and the little girl's eyes as she looked towards the light. Forums were boiling over. Hundreds of thousands of comments demanded a review of guardianship regulations, calling for an investigation of the social welfare system. A wave of hashtags spread quickly. Silence is not safety. Lucia speaks. 2,000 days in the closet. That evening, Lucia sat with Michael in the backyard of a special care center. The sky was getting dark. The wind was cool. No sirens, no lenses, no whispers. Lucia looked up, asking, "Are people mad at me?" Michael squeezed his daughter's hand gently. "Number, they're mad that for too long no one asked you, 'Are you okay?'" Lucia nodded. She drew a small circle on her palm with her index finger. "Now, I'm going to talk." And this time, everyone heard. After the trial, Melissa was taken away, closing a dark chapter in Lucia's life. But what was left behind didn't disappear with the verdict. They remained in the eyes, in the whispers, in the awkward bow of the people who had passed by the pain without stopping. Tyler was taken to live with his biological father in another state after the protective services confirmed his identity and completed the guardianship procedures. The middle-aged man, who had been cut off from Tyler for 8 years by Melissa, hugged his son in their first meeting. The two stood in front of each other silently for a long time. No tears, just the confusion of two people who had just realized they had been cut off from each other for too long by someone else. Tyler didn't ask about his mother. He knew, and like many children in obscure circumstances, he chose not to touch the memory. He drew in his notebook, drew a door ajar with someone walking away, and not coming back. In the old neighborhood, those who used to know the Carter family began to avoid each other. Windows closed tighter. Good morning greetings became rare. Accidental conversations became accusations. The third-floor neighbor who had heard crying but thought it was a cat. The security guard who had recorded the burning smell but thought it was just a faulty electrical outlet. The building manager who admitted never asking Melissa about Lucia's papers because she looked very decent. No one was arrested. But every time they saw Lucia's picture on the news, they felt a pang, not out of guilt, but for having been too easy to believe that nothing bad was happening behind a tidy door and a woman who knew how to smile at the right time. Michael returned to the neighborhood once to collect his old belongings in the storage room. As he walked through the hallway, a few doors quietly closed. People didn't call his name and didn't look him in the eye. Not out of hatred, but out of shame. He didn't blame them. He had also been the one who believed. At the same time, Rosa, Lucia's aunt, a high school teacher, and her husband Carlos, a quiet but thoughtful mechanic, filed for legal guardianship. The process was expedited by the agreement from Michael. He knew he wasn't ready to be a full-time father while still trying to learn how to be the father he had lost. Lucia first visited Rosa's house on a Saturday morning. The house was small, with a purple flower garden in front and a bicycle parked on the porch. Lucia stood in front of the door, grasping the hem of her shirt, her eyes looking at the wooden steps as something foreign. Carlos stepped out first, knelt down, and held out a blue crayon. "Your dad said you liked this color." Lucia looked at the crayon, didn't take it, but didn't back away either. 15 minutes later, when everyone was talking in the kitchen, Lucia walked in with a folded piece of paper. Inside was a picture of 3 people standing next to each other, touching hands, and a cat sitting at their feet. That was the first time she had drawn a family herself. Grandmother Anna was allowed to see her granddaughter after 6 years of Melissa refusing visitation rights. She came to the hospital with a hand-knitted scarf, her old hands trembling, her eyes blurred with tears as she saw Lucia walking out of the physical therapy room, her hair gently braided, her eyes hesitant. Lucia didn't say anything at first, but when she sat down, opened the scarf, inside was a tiny sweater. Lucia smiled, walked over, and hugged her from behind. She cried, not out of regret, but because she knew her granddaughter still had the ability to love. Lucia began to talk more. Short stories, small remarks, questions about colors, about meal times, about the birds on the window. Claire, the therapist, asked her one afternoon, "Are you still afraid of anything?" Lucia thought for a long time. Her eyes no longer avoided the light, but there was still a haze that adults couldn't wipe away. "I'm afraid no one believes I'm there." Claire took her hand. "Everyone sees you now, Lucia. Very clearly. No one can deny it anymore." Lucia nodded, not smiling, but there was something light in her figure as she walked out of the room that day. Michael continued to come to the center 3 days a week. He learned how to tell fairy tales again, how to listen to children's dreams without filtering logic. He took Lucia for walks, played games of guessing the shapes of clouds, made donuts from ready-made dough, and recorded every moment as if afraid that time would take it away again. One day, Lucia asked him while sitting and drawing on the lawn, "Do you miss Mom?" Michael nodded, without needing to think. "I miss her so much that sometimes I forget how to breathe." Lucia looked up at the sky, drawing a blue circle. "I miss Mom too, but now I think Mom is closer than I thought." Michael squeezed her shoulder gently. "Yeah, Mom is always with you." Lucia leaned her head on his shoulder, silent. The afternoon sun slanted through her hair. In that moment, Michael didn't think about the past, only the present. Michael moved to live temporarily in a small apartment just 2 blocks from Rosa and Carlos's house. He no longer wore his uniform every morning, no longer woke up to training alarms or the sound of marching boots. Instead, the doorbell rang softly whenever Lucia came to visit, holding her old stuffed cat and her eyes shining brighter every day. He still carried the remorse. It didn't disappear, but it had changed shape from a cold stone in his chest to a foundation for new things, like the moist soil after the rain, where life can begin again, slowly but surely. On the first morning he cooked breakfast for Lucia. He made runny poached eggs, spread too much butter on the bread, and was clumsy, not knowing whether to pour cold or warm milk. Lucia sat watching, not saying anything, just nodding when he asked if she wanted more honey. After eating, Lucia wiped her mouth, stood up and whispered, "The first breakfast you made for me." "Just okay." Michael burst out laughing. That sentence, not to criticize, but to say, she saw. She recorded. She was counting the little things that others had not counted. He learned how to tell stories with no beginning or end, learned how to sit for hours, cutting paper eyes for stuffed animals, learned how not to correct Lucia's grammar when she wrote in her diary. He learned how to say, "It's okay," when she panicked at a sudden sound. And most importantly, learned how not to say anything whenever she just wanted to be silent. One afternoon, Lucia was drawing on the floor, suddenly turned and asked, "Have you ever been scared?" Michael stopped. The question was short, but hit the layers of armor he had worn for so many years. He put his pen down, thinking for a long time. "Yes, I was scared when you didn't call me Daddy. I was scared when you were silent, and I didn't know if I was still your dad." Lucia didn't answer. She turned back to the crayon, but a few minutes later, she pulled the paper towards her, drawing another small hand lying in a larger hand, then gave it to Michael. "Your hand. My hand." No one said anything more, but Michael knew. He had just been forgiven. He started reading children's books every night, even though Lucia was old enough to read them herself. But the girl still liked to listen. There was something in his reading voice that made it easier for her to sleep. One night, in the middle of page 17 of The Little Night Watchman, Lucia fell asleep before the main character found the door home. Michael closed the book, sitting still for a moment longer. He no longer felt helpless. Now he could wait, not to save, but to be present. One day, Rosa called Michael to the back porch. Lucia was sitting in the middle of the yard, arranging pebbles in a circle. Each stone was numbered with a felt-tip pen. When Michael approached, Lucia explained, "This was a map of trust. Each pebble was a person. You're number 3, I'm number 1. Michael asked, "Who's number 2? Lucia replied, "It's Mom." Michael didn't ask more. He just silently looked at the pebbles and knew that, in this small world, he had been allowed to enter again. On the 10th Sunday after the trial, Michael and Lucia went to the bookstore. They didn't buy anything, just chose books, sat down in soft chairs, and read together. Lucia found a blank diary, leather cover, reddish-brown. Lucia didn't ask for it, just held it and looked. Michael bought it. That night, Lucia wrote the first page. "Today, Dad sat next to me without needing to ask what I was thinking. I like that. Dad being silent is enough." Michael read that line late at night. The room lights were soft yellow. He held the diary like a gift, too fragile to touch hard. A part of him still felt he wasn't good enough. But the rest, the part that was growing, began to understand that love doesn't need the right time, just the right way. Lucia began to attend a special class 3 days a week. The school was small, the teachers trained to work with children who had experienced trauma. She didn't talk much with friends, but she was willing to play puzzles, write on the board and sing along. She gradually integrated, not to become like anyone, but to redefine herself outside the shadow of the past. One day, when Michael picked Lucia up after school, Lucia pointed to the carpet in the middle of the class. "I sat there today, not leaning into the corner anymore." Michael smiled. "That's great." Lucia looked at him, tilting her head. "Did you sit in the middle?" He nodded. "Yeah. Whenever you need it, I'll always sit in the middle." Lucia smiled, nodded. She didn't need promises. She needed the consistent repetition of a person who wouldn't disappear. A year after Lucia was found, the city of Boston still remembered her as the girl in the closet. But for those who truly stayed by her side, Lucia was no longer a symbol of silence. She was a 6-and-a-half-year-old, now 7, who knew how to grow tomatoes, play a small keyboard, and write her name in 3 different fonts. No more hospital lights, no more cameras, courts, angry voices, or hundreds of eyes scrutinizing her every step. Instead, a steady rhythm of life where she knew that at breakfast, someone would always ask what she wanted to eat, where every coat smelled of sunshine, and every evening was a different story to end the day. Michael had become a part of Rosa's family. no longer just a guest visiting his daughter. He moved to live temporarily in the downstairs room, making coffee himself every morning, watering the flowers, and taking Lucia to school. He worked remotely, spending time writing in his diary, reading each page that Lucia recorded in slanted handwriting, sometimes misspelled, but heartbreakingly honest. Some nights, Lucia sat drawing for hours without saying anything. Michael sat next to her, not asking. Then Lucia gave him the drawing herself. It was the image of two people standing in front of an open door. Behind them was bright yellow light. Above, in thin lines, Lucia wrote, "We don't need to go far, just need to go out." Dr. Claire ended the official therapy for Lucia in November. The last session, Lucia hugged her, initiating for the first time. Not many words, but as she walked out the door, Lucia stopped, turned back and asked, "What kind of person do you think I am?" Claire didn't answer right away. She walked over, sat down at eye level, touched Lucia's shoulder, gently. "You're someone who knows how to wait without turning off hope. That's more powerful than courage." Lucia nodded, not quite understanding everything, but feeling warm enough to continue. As winter came, Rosa's small house was decorated with dried flower wreaths, yellow string lights, and hand-drawn cards by Lucia. She wrote Michael an early Christmas card, taped to his desk drawer. "I'm still scared, but now I know. Being scared doesn't mean being left behind." Michael read that line over and over again on Christmas night, when Lucia was asleep. He sat alone in the living room, the firelight dancing in his hands. A year ago, he didn't know his daughter was alive. A year later, she was teaching him how to live. The media gradually moved away from the story. No more big headlines, hashtags, or weekly news. And that was a good thing, because Lucia didn't need to be famous. She just needed to be normal. At school, Lucia was invited to play at a classmate's house. She told Michael in an excited voice, something that seemed simple, but for her was a miracle. "They have a rabbit named April. It's not afraid of anyone. It jumped into my lap right away. I think it knows I won't hurt it." Michael nodded. "Sure." Lucia hugged her stuffed animal tightly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Do you think I've lived enough?" He squeezed her shoulder gently, his voice low. "Not yet. Just starting." One spring morning, Lucia rode her bike for the first time without training wheels. Carlos ran a few meters behind her, shouting, "Don't look down!" And Rosa stood on the steps, laughing as brightly as the sun breaking on the yard. Michael filmed, shaking and laughing, almost bursting into tears when Lucia didn't fall, didn't get lost, didn't turn her head, just kept rushing forward as if she knew where the light was waiting. A few months later, Michael and Rosa officially completed the simultaneous guardianship procedures. Michael received official custody, but decided to continue living with Rosa and Carlos, not because he couldn't live alone, but because he understood love doesn't need to be separated. It just needs to be shared at the right time, with the right people. That night, the whole family made a special dinner. Lucia stood on the kitchen chair, sprinkling cheese on the pizza, singing softly as she worked. A song no one had ever taught her, a song about windows, about sunshine, about no longer having to live in the darkness to be safe. Reading this far, many people will probably sigh, not out of tiredness, but because that story lingers in the heart, like a lump that hasn't been named. A child living behind the closet for 6 years, no one sees. A father traveling half the world without knowing his child is a few hours away by plane. And so many people have heard, have suspected, but then remain silent. I don't blame them. I don't think we need to conclude this story with a verdict for society. Instead, I want us, those who are still living, still moving forward, to look back, not looking at others, but looking at ourselves. How many times have we passed a closed door, seeing something wrong, and then just stopped? How many times has a child been sad in the schoolyard, and we just thought, they must be tired? How many times has an old woman in the neighborhood walked slowly, quietly, smiling? And we've never asked if she lives alone. Maybe we didn't intentionally turn away. But this world is too busy, too noisy, making it easy for people to think that silence is peace. No sound means everything's okay. If I don't see it, nothing's happening. In fact, sometimes the scariest thing isn't the cry for help, but when no one believes that behind that wall, a soul is whispering to survive. The lesson I learned from Lucia's story is not don't be evil, nor be good. But pay attention, look a little closer, ask one more question, open one more window. We don't need to do anything big, just choose not to ignore. A look, a question. A small gesture can sometimes become the only ray of light to help someone not collapse. And perhaps the most important thing I learned, as Michael learned, is love doesn't come from doing everything right, but from daring to be present, even late, even unprepared. But sincerely, I know many of you, especially those over 65 who are watching this channel, may have gone through many similar things, may have been caregivers, may have been mothers, grandmothers, people living quietly in the neighborhood without anyone asking. I want to say to you, I am very grateful for your presence in this space. If you feel lonely one day, please don't think you have no one left to listen. On this channel, I hope it will be a place for people like you, like me, like all those who still keep compassion, to meet through stories, through sharing, through very real emotions. I hope you take care of your health, eat regularly, exercise gently, and if possible, don't keep all the sadness to yourself. Maybe you used to be silenced, or used to see someone being silenced. But today, we can do the opposite. We can listen, can believe, can speak out, and most importantly, can believe that the light always exists, just as long as we don't take our eyes off it. Finally, I just want to leave a question for all of us before ending this story. Is there someone around you, a child, an old person, someone living alone, waiting for you to listen but has never dared to speak out? If so, be the one to open the door first. Today. Right now. Thank you for reading this far. Thank you for caring. I hope you always see the light, after every door you have ever ignored.